1 year ago, a deal was struck to allow Ukrainian and Russian grain stranded on land by war to reach global markets through the Black Sea. That deal, brokered by the UN and Turkiye, has now ended after Moscow announced it was pulling out. Russia also warned the UN that it could not guarantee the safety of ships in the Black Sea and that it would take necessary measures to neutralize threats from Ukraine. Under the grain deal, nearly 33 million tons were exported, easing shortages in vulnerable countries reeling from inflation and internal conflicts. Moscow suggested the deal could resume once its demands to lift restrictions on its own exports are met. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he believes his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin wants to maintain the grain deal and that he would be contacting the Russian leader soon. The last ship carrying grain reportedly left Ukraine on Sunday. Several world leaders have appealed to Putin to reconsider extending the deal. And to further discuss the future of the Black Sea grain deal, joining me now from London is Jane Kinnemans. She is the Policy and Impact Director at the European Leadership Network. And from Washington, D.C., Eugene Chavskovsky. He is the Senior Director at New Lines Institute. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Jane, were you expecting Russia's withdrawal from the grain deal?
Russia has been complaining for quite some time that it's not happy with what it's getting out of the deal. So it's not wholly unexpected, and it comes just after Russia has also blocked a UN resolution that would have extended humanitarian access into Syria, which is another symptom of how many areas of vital international cooperation are becoming poisoned by the wider confrontation between Russia and the West, of which Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the main symptom, but isn't the whole of the problem. But I think Russia is indicating that it would still like to negotiate further because in this area it has made a number of quite specific demands. The problem is that those demands probably go further than Western countries are willing to accept.
So, Eugene, why do you think has Russia withdrawn from the deal? Because Russia says its decision to withdraw from the deal had no connection to the recent Crimea bridge attack. But what do you make of the timing?
Yeah, I think this is something that Russia had signaled for really several months now, that it was frustrated over not so much the direct sanctions from the West on Russia's agriculture, because actually those were exempt, but the effect of certain secondary sanctions were being felt in terms of shipping, insurance, and things of that nature. I will note, though, that Russia basically, ever since this deal was signed, Russia has complained about the certain elements of implementation, and it was eventually agreed to extend the deal. I think that Russia could be playing a similar game now. It has obviously withdrawn from the agreement, and now we saw the most recent attacks on Ukraine's port in Odessa. But I think there's still room for diplomacy to take place and for some bargaining to happen.
So we know Ukraine's Odessa port was hit by Russian airstrikes just recently, Jane, but Ukraine has claimed responsibility for the Crimea bridge attack. So what do you make of the timing? They must have known that the grain deal was set to expire. So was this a right military move on Ukraine's side?
I doubt that this has been directly connected to the grain deal. I think to a large extent what is happening militarily on the ground has its own logic. But next, of course, Ukraine is saying, well, our ships should be able to leave our ports. They should be able to export grain to the rest of the world. What right does Russia have to stop them? So a discussion will now arise about whether third countries might be prepared to guarantee the security of Ukraine's exports going out of the ports and through the Black Sea. And that opens up quite a big new discussion.
So, Eugene, what's the mood in the West? I mean, could the international community move forward in easing the barriers to Russia's agricultural exports after the suspension of this deal?
I think that, yes, certainly U.S. and UN officials have said even before the suspension of the deal that they were willing to discuss these things and to make certain improvements. But I think the mood in the West overall is one of condemnation of Russia. We saw Secretary Blinken speak out against Russia essentially weaponizing food supplies. And now the focus is on making sure that those food shipments do continue. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has said that that can still happen with the participation of the UN and Turkey. But Russia has already warned today, even after attacking the port infrastructure in Odessa, basically to be careful and that it can't guarantee the security of those ships. So again, I think part of that is negotiating, part of that is bargaining, but it's certainly a risk that needs to be taken into account.
So, Jane, this is the second time Russia has withdrawn from the grain deal after briefly exiting in November, and it rejoined a day after following Turkish President Erdogan's initiative. So will it be as easy for President Erdogan to convince President Putin, especially after his remarks on Ukraine's desire to join NATO?
So it's going to take longer if there is progress. I think many people are looking towards Putin's upcoming visit to Turkey as a point where, both leaders will want something to come out of that visit. They will want to be able to go back to their people afterwards and say that we achieved something. And so potentially this grain deal could become a part of that. But it's certainly not straightforward. What I think will potentially also make a difference and help to get the grain deal back online is the reaction of African countries, because Russia has been trying really hard ever since the invasion of Ukraine to really try to keep the global south on board and to send a strong message to African countries that they're being treated unfairly, that Russia's being penalized with sanctions, that the West are imperialists, all these arguments that can resonate in Africa. But we are seeing a number of African leaders becoming quite frustrated with the way that food security is being weaponized. And it's been interesting to see just very recently a Kenyan official tweeting that the decision by Russia is a stab in the back.
So Turkey is also an important importer of the Russian and Ukrainian grain. So what do you think, Eugene? Has Russia also sent a message to Turkey by terminating this deal after last week's NATO summit?
I do think that Turkey is one of the certainly recipients of the message that Russia is trying to send. I know that Erdogan had claimed, I think a day before, that there was an agreement, or that Russia had essentially, decided to move forward with the deal, and then we saw the opposite take place. So, as was mentioned, the upcoming visit, the upcoming meeting between Putin and Erdogan next month will be very important. There's a lot of issues at stake between the two countries, issues of cooperation, but also issues of contention. And I think that this is certainly going to be an important factor of this moving forward.
So, Jane, how important is the deal for the global food supplies? I mean, how will Russia's withdrawal affect the world security as well as prices?
Well, it's really quite significant. I mean, we've seen wheat prices go up already, and this is in the context of already very severe hunger, especially in the Horn of Africa. So, although it has a global effect, it is already very poor, very fragile countries that will be the most affected.
So Russia told Eugene, the UN shipping body, that it could no longer guarantee the safety of navigation in the Black Sea. What are the challenges for providing security for vessels transiting grain from Odessa to the Black Sea?
Well, I think the challenges have been made very clear in Russia's most recent attacks on the port itself. So far, Russia has not attacked actual vessels. Obviously, there's an international component there that Russia would be at least careful to not exacerbate in too much of a degree. But I think that the message is that there is risk as long as Russia is not a part of this deal. Even if Ukraine can get the participation of Turkey, of the UN, and of the global community at large, Russia can still act as the spoiler, which will give companies pause, which will give countries pause. So I think the onus right now is to try to get Russia back into the deal as quickly as possible without offering major concessions that the Ukraine and the West perceive as unfair.
So what options, Jane, does Turkey have for the continuation of the grain exports from Ukraine? We know maybe Russian President Vladimir Putin will come to Turkey, but before that, definitely the two leaders will speak on the phone. What do you expect?
There were already some options being explored that could be built on. There's been UN discussions about having a African Export-Import Bank be a platform particularly to prioritize transactions between Russia and Africa. So there are other kind of financing models that could potentially be built on. Russia is also particularly keen to be able to resume exports of ammonia, which go through Ukraine. So that's also going to be something quite complex. But there are these kinds of granular, practical areas where some of the blocks to financing and transport could be lifted. It just depends, really, whether the issues in Putin's mind really are these technical changes, which would free up some Russian exports. It would make Russia some more money, but would also get certain exports back on the world market. Or is it more a generalized sense of frustration and a desire to use whatever leverage Russia has? And it has a lot of leverage. Food is maybe especially useful for Russia to use in the summer because the energy weapon isn't as powerful. Obviously, once the winter comes back in Europe, energy supplies may again be one of the top issues. But what we know, is that Erdogan and Putin know each other very well. They've known each other for a long time, and they are very good at bargaining. They're very good at understanding people's interests. So I imagine they will be able to find some kind of way forward, as complex and horrible as all this is.
So, Eugene, in the worst case scenario, there have been some reports that Turkey is prepared to unilaterally send its navy to safeguard the passage of Ukrainian grain ships. Is this doable, and is this likely to add more strain on Turkish-Russian relations?
Well, I think it's certainly doable from a logistical standpoint. The question is how much risk that Erdogan and Turkey want to take in unilaterally, or at least without the participation of Russia facilitating these shipments. I think that Russia will be a lot more careful, obviously, in targeting Turkish military assets or that of other countries than it has proven to be in the case of Ukraine. But we also can't assume that Russia won't take certain risks. So I think this is part of the negotiation that will be happening. We have seen Russia and Turkey, stand off in certain other theaters, but I think the stakes here are quite high. And as was mentioned, the global community at large, Africa, Middle East, these countries depend on these food supplies, and Russia has built up relations with them. So to do that, to really jeopardize this deal, would risk those relationships as well. So it's certainly a lot of things that Russia has to consider moving forward.
So, Jane, for the time being, Russia is out of the picture. What's next? And is the Black Sea set to become the next hotspot?
It's a genuine worry. And of course, if there are hazardous incidents at sea, especially with any potential involvement of Turkey, a NATO member, these are things that can really escalate. So I think that countries, including some members of NATO, would be quite cautious about being involved in any kind of naval patrols. And that is one of the things that Russia's probably betting on. I think it is still at the stage that it's seeking to use this issue as diplomatic leverage.
All right, Jane and Eugene, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.